All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Landry. I'm going to introduce, let them introduce themselves. I'm doing a panel on algorithms and gotchas. I myself have actually just use what these guys do, so we'll try to ask some interesting questions to see how they go about doing their work. So, Arno?
Hi, I'm Arno Candel. I'm the chief architect at H2O. I've been doing algorithms for 15 years or so. First supercomputing, physics, and now the last 4 years on machine learning algorithms from tree-based methods all the way to deep learning.
I'm Rob Tibshirani, a statistician at Stanford. Been there for about 17 years now. Before that, I'm from University of Toronto in Canada. And I work on high-dimensional data and algorithms and tools, developing tools for that kind of data, especially in the school, in medicine, where I'm cross-appointed at Stanford.
I'm Erin LeDell. I'm a statistician and machine learning scientist at H2O, and I don't know. That's it. I came from Berkeley, so I've been implementing some of the research that I had there and implementing that into the H2O system.
I'm Madeline Udell. I'm a postdoc at Caltech right now. I just finished my PhD at Stanford, and I'll be joining the faculty of Cornell next summer. My PhD research was on generalized low-rank models, which is a sort of framework for matrix factorization algorithms.
So I'm Tomas Nykodym. I'm software engineer at H2O. I've been there for like the past almost 4 years now. I wrote the GLM package on H2O, among other things.
All right. So how do you get started on working on a new algorithm? How do you know what the next big thing or the next thing you should be working on, and how do you get started on something like that? Either the algorithm or implementation, so whoever wants to field this one. How do you get started with one of these? How do you know what a good thing to work on is?
Well, I guess I can start. For me, it often comes from a real problem I have, like with a collaborator in medicine or some other scientific field, where trying to solve a problem and the tools I know about aren't working very well. And I suggest maybe a way to improve a current tool or develop a new one. And I mean, I'm not a serious programmer. I program things in R and actually Fortran when I need to. So I tend to sort of think with, I experiment with R. I start with a simple idea and prototype it in R, and eventually, hopefully, it evolves into something useful. And then if I think it's a tool that's useful for people in general, they'll write a package, usually in R, to distribute the idea to users.
I could say a little bit. So I have kind of the same experience. So I did my PhD in biostatistics, and so a lot of the techniques that I used and then developed and turned into software were just the same thing, to solve edge cases or problems where there wasn't another good solution. And then, first it starts out in R, and then, if it's worthy enough, maybe it gets ported into other languages.
Yeah, I think it's important not to develop algorithms before the need arises. You don't want to sort of have a tool and go around sort of a hammer, go around looking for a nail. The way that sort of my process works is I walk around talking to people. I like to sort of hear about problems from industry or problems in science, in like the social sciences or medicine, have been very motivating for me in my work. And then, so you develop your first package, and only when people complain that it's too slow is it time to make it faster or larger scale.
So what's one of the biggest challenges you face either in implementing an algorithm or coming up with a new algorithm?
So if I may start here. Typically, the biggest challenge for me or for us in big data analytics is the scalability onto many machines, right? So the communication between these machines is what's going to keep you down in the end, because the network is never as fast as the memory or the CPUs. So you always have to think about what's going to happen if I now do all this work on all these machines. When are they going to talk to each other? How much are they going to talk to each other? Is this going to scale or not? It's not enough if you can make it work on your laptop or on 2 machines and then say, OK, I'll ship it. Soon as the customer is going to use it on 500 machines, and it's going to say it's only 2 times faster than on 1 machine, or maybe it's 100 times slower than 1 machine, right? You never know. There's so much overhead in networking. So the design of the algorithm has to integrate this whole aspect of network communication from the beginning.
Now, I guess the paradigm that's worked for me in the past is I sort of try to develop the method and the algorithm to solve the problem, correctly, and then I worry about efficiency of computation later. And And that it seemed to have worked, but I'm worried it's not going to keep working, because with big data getting so big, sometimes the algorithm design is really a central part of the idea. It's not so much just sort of, that you have a good algorithm and then you modify it to do the computation efficiently. The computational thought design might actually become part of the way you think about the problem from the beginning. So that's maybe the way things are changing. And I haven't yet experienced that, but I'm worried I'm going to have to face those new challenges in designing algorithms.
So Tomas, carrying what Arno said, what are some of the biggest challenges in moving something parallel? Is it just communication, or are there some other things that you have to worry about?
Right. Well, it depends on algorithm, obviously, because some parallelize very nicely and it's pretty much straightforward. For many others, especially for those which don't parallelize as straightforward, yeah, there's network communication is a big thing, and then I think you usually have several options which you can do, and then all of them carry a lot of work, and then you kind of have to guess which one is going to work best on your architecture, and it's often not really straightforward to know why. Am I better sacrificing more, to get less parallelization and save some network communication, or do I want to maximize my CPU usage, and because then the network overhead can be a problem or not. So it really depends on algorithm, right? And something like deep learning, which is very CPU intensive, you obviously want to load up your CPUs to the max. But yeah, I would say.
And so when designing an algorithm, do you usually pick a specific set or a data set or a data subset and go with one thing, or how do you expand to ensure the algorithm works on a couple different data sets or edge cases, that kind of thing? When do you start small, or do you start with several cases to make sure it works in a few different places? What's kind of the workflow of adding more data, different scenarios? Helen, you want to start?
I can try to answer that. So I mentioned that my background was in biostatistics. So usually I was designing an algorithm for a particular data set, basically. So there's, biological data sets are very valuable, and people sort of hoard them and keep them around for years and years and try to milk as much research out of them as possible. So if something's going to be around for 4 years, it's sort of worth your time to find a new method that works on that. And then I basically start with solving a very particular problem and then figuring out, could this be applied elsewhere, and then bringing in other data sets.
I guess I usually often start with the real problem in mind, but I'll start with simulated data, because I know what the right answer is, and if it's not working, I'll have an idea of how to fix it, right? And if it doesn't work for simulated data where the signal is huge, you got a problem, right? If it doesn't work with real data, well, there's lots of different reasons why it might not work. So start with small simulated examples, make sure it works in the slam dunk cases, and then make it harder and larger, and of course test the edge cases. And I'm not a great programmer, I'm not careful enough, but so often I'll take a shortcut and I'll go along and think, oh, that's not going to matter, that's never going to happen, right? And then a month later it rears its ugly head, and you find some bug that takes you 4 hours to find, and it's your code that you were too sloppy with, right? So try to be careful, build the pieces carefully, and test each one in edge cases. Right? Try to break your code. And for me, I have to give it to my graduate students. Try to break this, right? Mm-hmm. And you'd be amazed how easy it is to break things you thought were unbreakable. And only then do you sort of then scale it up to real large problems with real data. Yeah.
Cool. How do you balance speed, accuracy, and flexibility? These things often, you can't have all of that. So how do you balance exposing things, ease of use, so that an algorithm takes care of itself, algorithm or implementation, probably more specifically? So, Arno.
Yeah, I like to see it from the outside, if that makes sense. I like to see the user use the tool. I pretend like I don't know anything and then say just go, and I hope it works, right? So my ultimate goal is to get to that simplicity. And of course, in the end, you still want accuracy over time to be optimized. So it's always, it's never just accuracy or just time. But sometimes accuracy alone can be also cool. Like if you manage to get the highest accuracy ever, even though it takes 3 days, you'll still blog about it, right? But in the end, the customer is not going to use it. So it's always accuracy over time, and then make it as user-friendly as possible. But the priority is in all 2 points at the same time. the user-friendliness has to be key.
I think this is where it's very important to know what your target problem is, right? You might have a number of different use cases that you can imagine your algorithm being used for, but you have to know sort of which one you're writing the code for at that time. And maybe it's one that prioritizes accuracy, maybe it's one that prioritizes speed, it has a certain scale, you're going to need a certain amount of parallelism, or maybe you won't need any at all. If you try to write code that addresses all the cases at the same time, you're going to fail. So you need to know which one is your sort of the sort of top target. And then if later you decide that sort of there are other targets that are interesting, then you can extend the method, extend the code, or write a different package for the different case.
So Stephen Boyd and Hilary Mason both kind of mentioned the same thing about sometimes algorithms and ideas getting stuck in particular industries and verticals, and so it looks like a novel change, Hilary Mason said, to bring it out of one industry and show it to somebody else it's been there all along, but they just haven't really started using it. How do we combat that? How do we get algorithms and ideas, out of particular industries so that we can see broad use cases, or is that possible at all?
I think that actually coming to conferences is a good way, especially if there's if they're cross-industry conferences and you hear about things that you might otherwise not see in your, stream of wherever you get your information, if it's on, Twitter or Archive or, in the university that you belong in or the work that you belong in or something like that. So I think just going to a lot of meetups, a lot of conferences, and just having conversations, you hear about things.
Take advantage of any opportunity to talk to people who don't do what you do.
Yeah, I think the beauty of data science and machine learning is that both are agnostic to the field where they're applied in, right? Data science itself doesn't say what it's being used for, so the algorithm itself can be used for pretty much anything. So if you know that you need data science, you're already on a good track. You'll find something useful in there.
So deep learning is popular among some because it handles the feature engineering portion. That's the promise of deep learning. Is that a direction we're going to start to see other algorithms take, or is that going to be pocketed in deep learning, or it seems to be that a lot of research recently is in the deep learning space. Does that extend to other types of algorithms, or any opinions there?
Well, I mean, if an algorithm can take advantage of better features, then certainly you could use deep learning as a preprocessor.
True.
So most algorithms would benefit from better features. So I don't know if they'll be incorporated into other algorithms or used as a preprocessor to give you potentially better features.
I mean, I think the major limitation of deep learning is, if you're sort of creating features and then fitting a model based on those features, it means that your model has many more parameters, and so you need more data to fit it. I think there will always be problems for which you don't have enough data to be able to sort of fit all of these parameters. In that case, you're going to need a model that has more structure than a deep learning model does. But I do think that in a large number of applications, we're seeing more and more data, and that makes makes it easier to sort of find the features and then fit a model using those features without overfitting to your data.
So if you're developing something, how do you develop, or how do you make the decision of defining something as an edge case if you're going to run into it, or maybe partitioning it so that you're specifically aiming at something? If you're, I guess maybe in publishing, do you use a subset of problems so you don't have to deal with edge cases, or do you try to choose to broaden something? Is there a balanced trade-off there, or is it, again, I think,
well, when you're publishing a scientific, if I'm reading a scientific paper, and the only examples are ones in which the guy's method works great, I'm suspicious, right? So scientifically, I think, I think you really should test your method on a balance of examples, some of which your method does badly compared to other methods, or else it's just not credible. Now, software is a different question. I mean, I think you definitely want to test edge cases very systematically and try to break your method on all kinds of anomalous kind of situations.
Yeah. So, Tomas, I mean, how do you go about defining edge cases for that? I mean, I know internally we kind of write our own unit tests and things like that. So, how are you defining the unit tests? How do you go look for these now corner cases instead of edge cases?
Yeah, it's actually really difficult. Like, I mean, honestly, the best thing we come up with is like try to get as broad library of data sets as possible, and then run on all of them and make sure that the results on them are reasonable. But I mean, at no point we can guarantee 100% that like we'll work on any data set out there. So it's actually really difficult. And then we can try to generate it automatically, and then in like all different shapes, right? Like very wide, very very long. But yeah, in general, that's actually a really difficult problem.
Of course, another good way is to give it to a beta test group, like these guys, right? And you'll find within a week you'll get more bugs than we ever imagined, right?
Yeah.
Real people can find edge cases without even trying, it seems, right?
Yeah, we heard about that earlier. So Arno, can you expand on like kind of what the feedback loop is between the customers, defining new data sets, as you talked about earlier?
Yes, I remember in the early days, PayPal was sending us emails saying, this bug happened, but we can't share with you why this happened or what the data looked like. It just happened. So I had to guess what code path went there, right? And it turned out that they had sparse data, very wide data, and also missing values were in there. So there were always, I would skip a row if there was any missing value. But if you have 10,000 columns and 1% of your data has missing values, you sprinkle all these missing values, then every row will have a missing value somewhere. So all the rows were skipped. So they trained over basically no data. It had like 12 points left or something. And it would say confusion matrix, 12 total numbers, and it all didn't make sense. So I had to guess that was because of the missing values. And then I added this imputation of missing values that it automatically imputes the mean. And suddenly it was all good, right? That was just one example. But there were a lot of little feedbacks like that you never think about unless you actually test it on this kind of wide data with missing values.
So how do you decide to make something like a parameter internal to the algorithm? When you're implementing an algorithm, whether you let it be a user-defined parameter, whether you try to make it adjust to the data, or whether you just lock something in, like what are the kind of decisions you have to make for helping it be ease of use versus accuracy, that sort of thing? Arno or Erin?
So when I start writing a new function, I put in every parameter that I can think of so that I can test it. And usually they, unless I think it's going to confuse people, I leave that in there. And I think, we've talked about this at H2O where, especially on the deep learning, there's so many parameters. But, I think if you offer so many parameters, we should try to give some guidance on, stay away from these if you're not a, advanced user, but you can go ahead and play around with these values. And I think, that's maybe a compromise between the two, is just give them the tools, but also warn them and give some guidance.
I think offering all the parameters, but having strong defaults that work well most of the time is the compromise that I tend to go for, so that advanced users can twiddle them, but first-time users don't have to think about them if they don't want to.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think I sort of make the assumption that most users are not sophisticated, or at least they're not going to spend a lot of time with any one product. They have a lot of choices, so you can't expect them to spend a great deal of time thinking about what the parameter choices are. So offer most things with good defaults, unless they absolutely have to choose it, and then allow them the flexibility to fine-tune them if they want. Yeah.
I know, like in our GLM, we have some where we'll make a data choice, like based on your data, we'll look at the columns and we'll decide. So, I mean, how do you go about deciding what those thresholds are, whether we're going to make a choice for a user, which sometimes can be difficult, because when we do this, if we use a default, the default isn't always the same thing, so they can't reliably know exactly what happened. We do this in a couple cases, and we try to advise people. So what are the trade-offs of trying to make that almost data-driven choice? You come at us with a data set, we'll make a choice for you, and how do you expose that? And have we had any difficulty with users to try to understand when we'll do that, kind of thinking for them under the hood? So I know that happens in GLM and Random Forest at least.
Yeah, I mean, well, especially in GLM recently, we added things like that where, like, let's say you pick a different solver and then some of your default parameters will be different, which can be very confusing to people. But, let's say if you pick LBFGS, it will work better with different defaults than another type of solver. And then, there is a trade-off between being confusing to people and giving good default behavior, right? And honestly, I decided to go with good default behavior and then document it. But, I haven't heard complaints yet, but, there might come in the future. But yeah, I guess it's like a usability issue, right? Like, would you prefer to to have like a less confusing interface, which sucks. If you, like you have to be smarter to not to suck versus here. Yeah, you reduce the requirements on the user, but he might not be running what he thought was running. Yeah.
So both of you are working with H2O to actually see some of us use some of your work in distributed settings and in different places. I mean, how does that interest you? I mean, how has that experience gone, or just anything you can expand upon that experience?
Well, I think it's been very exciting to be able to sort of use my algorithms on much larger data sets than I had sort of programmed for myself in Julia or Python. So, I mean, for me, it's been a very positive experience, and I'm very sort of excited about the possibilities, particularly for using H2O to build sort of, I mean, in the case of generalized low-rank models, good feature representations for using very large data sets, and then using those feature representations to build good models on small data sets. So I like the idea of sort of using sort of large-scale distributed parallelism when it's necessary, and then being able to take the results of that and apply it to small data analysis again.
So maybe these two aside, Erin, you said earlier that there sometimes can be a disconnect between the theory and the actual implementations of algorithms. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so sometimes you take shortcuts to save time, or, I mean, I guess that's usually the reason why you would take a shortcut in a theoretical sense when you're implementing an algorithm. I think it's good to have some understanding of, the penalties that you pay. So I've seen there's another implementation of the stacking ensemble algorithm that exists, and they took kind of this shortcut of, instead of doing all the cross-validation, you just do like a train and a test and build this secondary meta model on top of that. And I think the authors thought this is an awesome shortcut. Like, we actually have talked about doing this in our own implementation. So it's good actually to have both choices. But in that case, they actually made that choice for the user, that all users have to make this shortcut, and the performance is lost. And so when you're doing an ensemble, usually the thing that you care about is the accuracy. That's actually one of these cases where you don't necessarily think about the balance between accuracy and speed. It's kind of this idea that I care the most about accuracy, and I'm going to just work my best to try to make the speed reasonable. So I think when you make those shortcuts, you should think about, is there an easy way for me to code this such that I can have both ways implemented and just allow people to make those cost choices on their own?
Yeah, it's important to be able to turn the knob on these approximations from very bad to very good, right? Ideally, the very good is perfect. So, for example, for our tree-based methods, the binning that you do, if you turn the number of bins to 1,000,000, it's pretty much as good as finding the exact split point, versus the default might only find one of 1,000 points or one of 20. So, of course, there's approximations, but the user should be able to get away with specifying the slow route that's accurate.
I think one of the hardest things in making these trade-offs is knowing how to document them in such a way that the user will figure out what trade-off you made and knows how to tweak the trade-off if they want to. I think that's an ongoing challenge and not something that anyone has very good solutions for, because frequently the users don't read the user guide, or if you want to make the user guide sort of comprehensive, then it's so long that it's very hard to find in it what you want to find. One answer to this is open source software, making it easy for them to actually read the code so they can see what's happening. But that requires very sophisticated users.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally using, I'm a R user before I met H2O, and still use R, but yeah, reading the vignettes actually can be very helpful, because that's sort of a balance between the full API and what the authors would like you to kind of know about their algorithms. So yeah, fully agree with that one. So there's a couple questions in a row here, but so first, what's the next big thing? But if we back up one step, what's the current big thing? Like what are and maybe there's a couple. I mean, we know deep learning seems to be everywhere, but beyond deep learning, is there a current big thing? Anybody want to take this?
Well, I'll try. So something that we've sort of talked about at H2O is making the whole data science process more automated and more less prone to user error. So if you have a certain type of data, maybe there's some certain subset of methods that should be applied in the pre-processing step to sort of get the best results, and sort of adding a lot more guidance to that full pipeline is, I think, that's not necessarily an algorithm per se, but just formalizing this process of data science that we're doing into a way that people don't end up, making weird choices early on and not being able to get results. And ensembles.
Ensembles.
I guess one of the things that my group and others at Stanford are working on are the idea of, which sort of relates to that, is post-selection p-values and confidence intervals. So a lot of the algorithms we apply, all the algorithms we apply, do some kind of a greedy search through data. You find some apparent signals, but then you ask the question, well, are they real signals, or I just found them because I looked really hard, right? So we're developing new methods, mathematical and statistical methods, to try to assess the strength of the evidence given the search that you did. And we're hoping those tools, we're starting to write R packages now and papers on this that, again, for the part of data science where you're not just doing prediction, but you want to understand what you've got in terms of the features. The algorithm has found these features to be important, but are they actually important, or just are you getting those because you did a very exhaustive search through a large set of features? So it's trying to address that part of the science.
Yeah.
I think a big missing piece right now is the knowledge that the algorithm has. How do you translate that back to the user, right? Let's say GBM found you the highest predictive model ever for certain things. You still want to know what happened that actually caused all this. And the algo might know it, but you might not. So getting that knowledge out somehow is still a big unsolved problem.
Yeah, it seems to be a theme I know I've taken back from the conference, that a lot of people are looking for transparency in random forest and GBM, and it doesn't feel like, I keep citing partial dependence plots, but I mean, is there research out there, even though we see a lot of drive from customers and people asking us, but is there research into that transparency of these otherwise opaque models? I mean, maybe deep learning as well, because we've seen some papers come out on that. Is transparency one of the next things that people focus on, or is that more implementation?
Some people are doing that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think another challenge is sort of the idea of data, people call data drift, right? This idea that data is bigger and therefore the problem is easier is not really true, right? Because, I gave you a choice, you'd rather have 1,000 observations of very homogeneous, pure data, or 1,000,000 observations that's a mess from different times and places, and you don't know what's what. Well, I might rather have the 1,000 observations because I know what I've got, and I can assess the quality of the information. I can fit maybe one model to it. So big data also comes with bigger variance, drift, variability, and it's not so clear that, well, how to deal with that aspect of big data. It's not all good news. It's also a big challenge as to how to sort of do your predictions and modeling over a very disparate set of data and give some reliable answers that apply to maybe most of that data.
So is there room for precise skill sets in either developing algorithms? We've seen this big data triangle, a data scientist, person in the middle, but as far as stepping back and looking at new algorithms or implementations, I mean, is that going to be heavy mathematicians, heavy computer science, or are we going to see collaborations, or a particular going after a data scientist who's maybe all of those or above? I mean, where are we heading as far as that goes?
Yeah, I think every algorithm that comes out in the future will depend on all these three pieces to be combined. So the math has to be super great, otherwise you won't be able to beat the current ensembles. The implementation has to be great, otherwise it won't work on big data, and the users have to know what to do with it. So it's definitely not easy to make a better algorithm today than what already exists.
So what's a process that maybe led you to a design or an idea of a new algorithm that you think just had a big impact? Maybe it's something you've done that you're proud of recent, but a particular process led to that.
I'm going to nominate the lasso.
Oh. Well, actually, the lasso, I read a paper by Leo Breiman on the garrote. I don't know if people know that it's a sort of a non-negative. In the garrote, you fit by least squares, and then you put a non-negative multiplier on each of the coefficients. This was about 1994. And I read that paper, and it's really interesting, but I thought, I didn't know why he did things in 2 stages, and that led me to sort of streamline it into a 1-stage model called the lasso. So that paper was directly inspired by Leo Breiman's Garrote.
And I find that interesting too, as far as, I mean, I'm a big GBM user, and it almost was news to me that Breiman suggested really the idea of boosting. But then it came in, and it's commonly cited as Freud and Shapiro because of the implementation. So is there a difference? I mean, does it need an implementation for an algorithm to catch on, really? Or I mean, we actually, following that, Boyd said that it used to be a 10-year cycle. Now we've got that down to maybe 3 months or something like that. Is that
Depends how sophisticated your users are, right? There's some users who can read an algorithm in a paper and implement it no problem, and there's some users who can't. So I think it's quite exciting to be able to take your algorithm to people who wouldn't be comfortable, reading it in a paper and implementing it. And for that, it does require sort of more robust implementations and more user-friendly implementations. So I think one of the most fun things that I'm working on right now is taking an implementation of generalized low-rank models to a social science domain. And social scientists are just used to thinking in different terms. They think about sort of causation in different ways. They think about sort of what missing values mean in different ways. They think about what it means to impute missing data in different ways. They care about sort of confidence intervals in different ways than sort of I'm used to in a sort of more predictive machine learning mode. And that means that the implementation has to be different. But so sometimes you need a special implementation for a special audience, and some people can just read your paper, read your blog post, and run with that.
I think boosting is an interesting example because actually it was Freund and Shapiro that invented it in '95, and they wrote this paper that's very kind of strange. I mean, they were AI people, and they wrote it from sort of a pack learning kind of viewpoint. And then statisticians, me and Friedman and Hastie and Breiman all read it, and we tried to figure out, and it was really working. People kept reporting, gee, this thing really works with data, right? But it was mysterious because there was no model being fit. It was an algorithm with these pack learning guarantees. And, so then a number of us spent years trying to figure out just what is this doing? And that led to the GBM, Friedman's gradient boosting and Breiman's versions of boosting, and also random forest, then was inspired by boosting. So it was a nice example of how people in a different field, thinking very differently, can really shake up another field, right? Because the boosting and random forest have had a tremendous impact on statistical learning, machine learning. But it came from a very different set of people. And I don't think they even now don't accept it. We have our own way of explaining boosting with modeling. And I think Freund and Shapiro don't really believe it. I mean, there's still a cultural difference, which is fine. It's probably better for not everyone to think the same, because then we get a greater variety of ideas.
So about a little under 20 minutes, we can open up to some questions. If the audience has some questions, try to go around the room if we have mics. Definitely.
Seems like there's a question here. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi guys, excellent panel. Thanks for the insights. I want to go back to the question of deep learning. So I've been at Rob's talk earlier, and he reported that Lasso worked where deep learning did not have enough data. And I know that Arno is the author of deep learning for H2O, so I watched his face, during Rob's opinion, and he was full of emotion, but he didn't express it. I just want to know what Arno, what's your point on strengths of deep learning? Is it the best thing since sliced bread? Should we all drop everything and do it? Wonder, just dwell a little bit more on that.
So you want my viewpoint of deep learning? Is that what you? Yeah. Oh no, sorry. Okay, I wouldn't quite get.
My opinion on deep learning? I don't think it's the best thing since sliced bread, but it certainly is. It's good to know that there's brute force methods that now, with the advance of computing power and some smart methods, can make sense of data. But I'm still unfulfilled in a way that the brute forceness of the method is the only thing we have, right? There's no beauty in it other than that it works, if you want. Of course, it's nice to say our brain is kind of like that, but it's not really true. So it would be nicer to either have something that is maybe a little less brute force and still get the same accuracy. So for example, these reduction techniques where you can take a deep neural net and turn it into a shallow neural net that still has the same predictive power. If we can make that more usable, maybe we can then save some of the complexity. So I don't think we're done yet. And I do like gradient boosting because it's natural how you improve. You make a mistake, you fix it. Of course, stochastic gradient descent is similar. You make a mistake, you fix it. But how you fix it is maybe the question, right? So everything is iterative. And I'm not super happy with deep learning by itself. But it works.
So in the NLP space, is the text mining days over and computer vision problems is the next frontier, or is with deep learning, is it more computer vision problems and not tackling those text mining issues, which are still not really solved in terms of context and everything in that space?
I think he was asking you.
Okay, so I would say recurrent neural nets are cool, right? The sequence learning, they can do text and all that. So that's a different type of neural net than what we looked at here. Those things are really cool. They will take over and they will take unstructured data and just understand sequences and translate languages from one language to another. They'll make meaning of what you're trying to say, semantic indexing and all that stuff. So I think the future is definitely in unstructured machine learning, but that will take time. And it's not clear which method is going to be the end winner, if you want. But there are exciting projects out there. And H2O itself is currently focusing on the structured data, if you want, the old school, but make it available for everybody and make it run on big data. But we do see that there's this opening gap that says, how do you handle these videos and texts and all these unstructured things out there that also carry information? So we'll have to address those as well.
Okay, one way to learn how to code is to read somebody else's elegant code. Does that work for algorithms too? And if so, what algorithms would you suggest that people study who are learning how to write good algorithms?
So I can sort of answer that question. I think if you're reading somebody's code who's been optimized and it's designed to do something super fast, it's not going to be easy to understand what's going on necessarily, because the way that you write something might not at all reflect like how the equation looks in the in the math. So I think finding a single node, like not parallelized version of something, is a good place to understand an algorithm. Maybe an R package is probably a good place to start, although a lot of R packages call Fortran code or C++ code, so not that kind of R package, but I guess an inefficient R package would be the best place. And probably something written by the original author of the algorithm would also be good.
Or pseudocode, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is even better, where if you can see the logical layout of the algorithm without having to see the details. Yeah.
I'm interested in the shelf life of some of the models, or in the back. I mean, I'm interested in your experience, the panel's experience with shelf life for some of the models built using gradient boosting for behavioral model applications. So in scientific applications, I can imagine the insights that you derive from these methods can be pretty durable over time. But as soon as the meme changes, some of these behavioral models the predictive insights could go away sort of overnight. And I'm just interested in, folks, your experience with having built some of these gradient boosting models, whether you've seen a decay in predictive insights over time and the shelf life of the models that you've implemented and how soon you have to refit.
Want to take it?
I'll say one thing. It's not about what you asked, but it's sort of related. So things like, so you just brought up text processing. So maybe like pre-processing methods have a shorter shelf life than algorithms themselves. So a couple of years ago, it was maybe still okay to do bag of words, and then then people invented other things. Now there's word to vec, and then there's even versions after word to vec, like word movers distance, and so the bar gets moved quickly, and so if you're still doing bag of words, then there's no way, regardless of what algorithm you choose, that you're going to get the same performance. So I think maybe at least in the text space, which is the example that I'm giving, there's more focus on the pre-processing, maybe for images too as well.
And then, more directly addressing the question, I think the question was, if you're modeling some changing phenomenon, how often do you need to refit the model? And the answer is as fast as the underlying phenomenon changes. I'm not sure there's a better answer than that, right? So you can try it out, right? You can try out tomorrow using your model from yesterday, see how well it works. If it works very poorly, that tells you that you need to collect more data and you need to retrain the model.
Yeah, this has been very interesting. I wonder if you think there are any potential pitfalls in the widespread adoption of machine learning as compared to old school kind of understanding what's happening from a first principles approach, particularly in areas where we don't understand what the first principles are now. For instance, I could imagine people 200, 300 years ago, if they had machine learning, looking at the trajectories of projectiles and understanding how to develop a model that would predict where your projectile would land without ever having to come up with Newton's laws. And now that's kind of an extreme example, but I just wonder if there's, the information is in the model, but what, we kind of touched on this earlier, how do you get at it if you're working in an area where you don't already know what the first principles are?
Well, an example I gave in the earlier talk on trying to diagnose stomach cancer from mass spec, I mean, it's a machine learning algorithm, but I'm hoping there'll be a feedback from the high-dimensional features to a sparser set, which then the scientists can go back and try to understand the first principles of the disease. So if the algorithm can find some important peaks that are characteristic of cancer in the patient, you can then go back and see what those peaks represent from a chemical point of view, and then hopefully that'll increase the understanding of the cell biology and eventually learn to some first principles. So I think there's hopefully a feedback loop between first principles and high-dimensional modeling of data. And that feedback is sort of what you talked about. The feedback has to be sort of enabled by helping people to interpret the results of these algorithms in ways that they can understand.
Yeah, I know from an applied sense, that's how I prefer to actually solve the models, is to kind of feel the features, start with something that intuitively makes sense, maybe try some calculations, but I really want to look at the feedback the models are giving me, because maybe I can generalize those features, and I think that's what first principles really is. That's the full generalization of something such that it's accurate in so many cases. So I think that's always preferred, and even machine learning models will do better if you can capture the first principles than whatever data representation you have. So I think you're always trying to fight towards a better representation of features if you don't have it. And insight is what you're looking for sometimes, even if at the end of the day all you care about is a predictive model.
Time for one last question.
Could you offer some thoughts on designing models and algorithms for adversarial environments, where you do something with the algorithm and then the environment changes based on what you've done?
And then what was the last part?
Yeah, adversarial environment.
So, for example, spam. You do something for fraud. You detect something, and then the environment changes based on what you're doing. Are there some specific thoughts you have on this?
So I guess I'll say that it kind of goes back to just checking your models over and over again and making sure that they're still working. And you'll know the minute that your spam detector is not working because I guess you would constantly still have to be collecting training data as well to verify this. And I think there's a lot of papers that look at that type of thing, and I think there was a paper a couple of years ago about deep neural nets being very susceptible to adversarial images. So people would show it, and it's let's say like a cat and dog detector, and you show it one kind of cat, and it just can't, there's some weird edge case or something. So I think, you need to be aware of if your algorithm has those, I guess, inefficiencies in it, or if you're actually, because you always have to assume that your algorithm could be applied in any domain, including adversarial domains, but if you're more focused on training models rather than designing algorithms, then you should be definitely aware of it. I don't know if that gives you any tips, but yeah.
I mean, there's a a huge body of research on designing algorithms that are robust to adversarial data settings. So I'm very far from an expert on that, but I know there's a ton of work on it, and it's a field in its own right. My understanding is that if you're talking about some specific domain, the spam domain, if you want to sort of apply one of these algorithms, it's going to have some assumptions on sort of the range of actions available to the adversary. And in any real setting, it's quite difficult to model what the range of actions available to them is. So I think no matter how robust your algorithm, you are going to have to sort of resort in the end to collecting sort of continuing feedback, monitoring the performance, and making sure it doesn't degrade.
Awesome. Give a round of applause for our wonderful panel here.